Hello, this is Mark Baer. You're watching the YourTown television program. My guest, Jon Wizard, who is a candidate for the Seaside City Council.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Appreciate it. Happy to be here.
So let's start with just a background. Who are you, and how did you get here to be running for council?
So I understand I'm not the prototypical candidate. I'm a little bit younger than most people who end up running. Not everyone. And I came here by way of the military, as a lot of families do. My dad's a civilian with the Department of Defense, and we moved from San Diego about 20 years ago. So I went to area schools, went to MPC, and worked here locally in public safety before experiencing an injury and having to kind of reinvent myself a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So, and what inspired you to run?
Well, there are so many things happening in our community that everyday people just can't focus on because they are busy with work and school and kids and traffic and housing. And I thought, you know, my entire life has been about public safety. My grandparent was a superintendent of schools, and my dad has worked longer than I've been alive in the federal government's civil service. And I started off as a reserve firefighter in Pacific Grove and a dispatcher.
So what inspired you to run for office?
There are a lot of people in our community that have all these different issues that they're dealing with, getting kids to school and housing and the infrastructure of our communities with traffic and water availability that's been an issue in our community for more than 20 years. And so when you're not able to devote a lot of time to those issues because you have to live your life, other people are involved in that decision making. And so I was fortunate in that I found myself with a lot of time after I had that injury that I referenced. And so I thought, well, I've spent my whole adult life working to make people's lives better, one person at a time, whether it was as a firefighter or as a police officer. What if I were to help a lot of people all at the same time? And that's sort of how I went down that journey of public policy and looking into the elected office and where I find myself today.
Wow. So what have you done to prepare yourself for this? How's this work?
So there are so many things you need to do in order to be successful in a campaign.
I mean, politics is a whole new game.
Yeah, really it was just asking for help. I solicited help from all the different elected officials in the area. Some of them didn't respond to me. That's okay, they're busy. But some did and kind of gave me some pointers and helped me kind of find my bearing. And then attending city council meetings, attending fora meetings, attending water management district meetings, going to these different places, reading the most amount of information I've ever read in my life. Really, it's been like drinking water from a fire hose, but the more you do it, the better you get at it. And so once that muscle got a little more exercised, I feel like I've got enough information to really connect the pieces and make an informed decision.
Then how did you had to develop your public speaking?
Certainly. Well, it helps. I did study public relations when I was at San Jose State, so a little bit of media writing, a little bit of public presentation. So some of those things I did have a leg up, but by no means was I an expert in them. So it really has been a process to kind of mold the message properly so that it's interesting enough for people to listen to, but at the same time not so wonky that people can't understand it.
So just the art of messaging.
Yeah, that's
is so interesting, and people who can take complex ideas, break them into understandable thoughts without pandering or lying.
Right. It's quite a skill that I'm still developing. And of course, the most successful politicians have that skill down pat. And the thing that we expect from folks in Sacramento and folks from DC, we expect them to have these sound bites and these punchlines, and that's their job. I mean, they're professional politicians. But the people who serve us at City Hall, at the county government building, they're in our community, they're local, and they're everyday people just like us. So learning how to be honest and forthright but still succinct is really
on message, consistent.
It's a skill I'm still developing.
Understandable.
Absolutely.
It's just really interesting. So let's talk about Seaside. Seaside is a really place on the ascendancy right now.
Absolutely.
What would you like to see change there? What do you see there?
Well, I think the pressing issue, the crisis of our time is affordable housing. And that's not to say low-income housing or public housing, but housing affordability in general. So very quick information. They calculate housing burden based on income. So if a family of 4, the median income is a little more than about $65,000 or $70,000 a year, median income in our area. And so they calculate affordable housing at 80% of that, or about $56,000. So the United States Congress has declared that 30% of your income is a reasonable amount of money to pay for housing. Anything more than that is a burden. Well, that works out to be about $1,500 a month. And I don't know anywhere on the peninsula where you can pay $1,500 a month and adequately house 4 people. That's just not going to happen. So that means pretty much everybody here is housing cost burdened. And so we need to have a radical shift in the way that we look at this problem so that we might actually do something beneficial for the people who have this burden. And I'm not saying that we need to do radical things. I'm saying we need to think differently about how we tackle this issue, because nearly everybody is affected by it directly, but certainly everybody is affected by it indirectly.
And you can't have if people don't have a place to live, you can't have a great community.
That's absolutely right. Housing is the key, because without somewhere to live that's adequate, affordable, and even available, because there's so few houses and apartments that are even available, without those things,
teachers, fire, police.
Absolutely.
Your people who are going to be making your food.
Absolutely.
Where are they going to live?
Community,
yeah.
That's a very important element, is the community. But more to the technical side, if you can't have people who live in your community, who's buying the goods and services that generate generate sales and property tax? Who's using the infrastructure so that it doesn't just decay from being left idle? So there's the technical side of how people living in your community equals revenue for the city to then provide service. But there's also the community side, where if I'm on a block and everybody next to me, it's a second or a third home, or there's 10 people crammed into a two-bedroom place, that changes the character of our communities. And we didn't all pick a place to live only for us. We thought about, what street am I on? How close am I? What's this? What my neighbors are like that. All of us check out who our neighbors are before we move in. And if your neighbors are nobody, would you live in a city with no neighbors? You move to the county areas. You move to the unincorporated, the further spread out.
Right.
So it does have multiple layers of considerations when we talk about how housing is the central theme of what we need to be looking at in our region.
Well, that brings us to FORA, and explain what that is.
So FORA is the Fort Ord Reuse Authority. They were empowered through an act of our state legislature to oversee the reuse of the former Fort Ord, as their name intends. So FORA has been around since officially the end of 1993, but really 1994 is when the base closed. And in 2014, they were scheduled to sunset, which is a government term for kind of just right into the sunset and go away. And it was determined that their work wasn't done, and so they were given an additional 6 years. They were extended to 2020. And 2020 is right around the corner. In fact, they are due to present something to a local body that oversees the formation and dissolution of government entities by December of this year. So there's a lot of action at the FORA board, which is actually made up of elected officials from all over the county, so that touch Fort Ord. So FORA is loved by some and hated by others, and I don't have a problem with the people at FORA by any means. I've met almost all of them. They're good people. They're hardworking people. I have a problem with how FORA in more than a generation has not accomplished the goal of what they were established to do. And I think that through some more self-determination, we might be able to more quickly realize what the Army had in its mind, what it saw for us when they left this area.
Well, affordable housing, I see where some of it could go.
Absolutely.
And and why the skeleton city is still out there. I mean, it's weird. It's a little off-putting. It's like having this ghost shack. It's kind of unnecessary, where we're in a crisis situation, and it's moved. All the years that I've been here, it's been stagnant. And so everything that you want legislatively and to bring up the community, well, that's where I'd be looking.
Absolutely. There is, Seaside has more than 1,000 acres in former Fort Ord. And so if you look at Seaside proper, all along Del Monte and Fremont and Broadway and all the streets within the lower portion of Seaside, you don't see 30 acres here, 50 acres there, because it's a city. But on the periphery of Seaside, we have all of this open space. Now, there is 22,000 acres of land that is preserved in perpetuity to never be touched and be left perfectly green and beautiful as open space and habitat. The city of Seaside has 1,000 acres, and of that, a third of it is going to be preserved as open parks and space and community park, regional parks. And we realize that the city of Seaside, because of the water issues that we have in our community, has not meaningfully increased the supply of housing in more than a generation. And while I'm not an economist by trade, certainly we can all appreciate scarcity and supply and demand. And if you have fewer houses and more people who are demanding houses, the price will go up. So we need to build more homes.
What's the hang up? What's causing the delay? Is it
one of the underlying factors of our housing crisis is here on the Monterey Peninsula, the Superior Court of the state of California has issued a cease and desist order to the California American Water Company to reduce the amount of water that they pump from the Carmel River. And also the Seaside groundwater basin, imagine a big pot of water underneath the city of Seaside, has been adjudicated by the Superior Court to say only this amount can be taken. And so with those things, one of the ancillary concerns was you can't put a new water meter in the ground. So if I have an undeveloped parcel of land and I try to put a water meter in to put a house and connect those things, I can't do the water meter. Well, without the water meter, you can't have water, and you can't have housing without water. So we end up having these creative solutions, these workarounds. The interesting caveat before we move to the next topic is Marina Coast Water District has an exclusive agreement with the Army to provide water on the former Fort Ord. So there is no issue about water meters or water, and thus no issue about affordable housing anywhere on the former Fort Ord.
So this is just what you're saying is it is a fixable problem.
It is a fixable problem. It requires political capital. It requires our elected officials sticking their neck out, and it requires that we don't, as the electorate, as the residents, as the people who are here, that we don't settle for inaction. If you cannot help us with this problem, we will find someone who can.
Yeah, and again, it's never going to be so. I've seen water used as a club to stop growth.
Absolutely.
And I think just the price of living here and many of the problems, the difficulties of living here is enough of a barrier not to use water as a thing, unless I'm misreading the situation.
No, you're absolutely correct. There are private agreements. There's a group of wells, Sleepy Hollow. It's behind the Mid-Valley Safeway. And that system of wells produces a lot of water, so much water that there was a special side agreement made in that court order that I referenced earlier, where if you are in Pebble Beach, Carmel, or Carmel Valley, or the Carmel Highlands, you can bypass the court's order as long as you're willing to pay for it. Here, you can't do that. So we have to talk about and be willing to accept that there are some uncomfortable things to discuss related to equity and related to why some people can buy their way out of a problem, but other people are saddled with that problem no matter what.
And listen, again, if you're not going to have someone in the fire department, the police department, someone working in your restaurant, someone teaching your kids, you can have the most luxurious place in the world, but you're going to be living in it's untenable.
That's exactly what's happening in South Lake Tahoe.
So their problem is your problem.
Absolutely.
It's not their problem over here and you're okay over here.
Yeah.
And so it's a bigger area problem is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Now is desal is that a help coming in? If desal comes in, is that is that part of the solution? Or
absolutely, it's part of the solution.
Yeah.
There's the idea of having a drought resistant, drought tolerant, nothing is absolutely drought proof, but a drought resistant near permanent source of water is, of course, a great idea. The issues around desal are how expensive it is. It's the most expensive way to produce drinking water because it requires a huge amount of energy to extract that water, and then a huge amount of energy to process that water and get the salt out of it, and then you've got to pipe it all around. Then you talk about, particularly the issue for us is where that water is coming from. And because of the adjudication of the Seaside groundwater basin, you can't put a new well in, and thus we have to find a new spot for that well. Well, it has been determined by CalAm that the best place is in the Marine and Coast Water District service area, and so you get into issues of equity about, well, how are we going to take their water and clean it and send it over here? Does that affect them? There's a lot of science involved, there's a lot of political maneuvering involved, but at the end of the day, I think that if the court has said CalAm stop pumping from the river, you need to find an alternative source, then CalAm should find a source within their own boundaries. Just in a very simple terms.
And affordable housing and growth aren't the same thing.
No.
People, just if there was suddenly affordable housing here doesn't mean that it would be overrun here. There's just limitations to who can live here because of jobs are scarce and everything else. So,
that is an enlightened opinion, Mark. I really appreciate you saying that.
But I know that that is used as a...
Indeed, it is. And so to your point, when we have homes in Seaside, I mean, if you drive through the interior of Seaside, there are cars parked from corner to corner. There is more than one family living in a home, more often than not. Multiple people, multiple adults who don't know each other sharing rooms because the price of housing is so expensive. And so creating affordable housing does not attract people from Oklahoma and New York and Texas. Affordable housing gives room for people who are already here to live decently. That's what affordable housing is for. And so to create affordable housing is a moral obligation of our government to make sure that the people they serve have adequate, available, and affordable places to sleep at night so that they're safe and they can be more productive members of our society, because that affects you and me in our daily lives, even if you and I don't live in or seek out that affordable housing.
So just before we sign off here, how have you been connecting with your voters? How's this experience been for you? And what are you learning?
It's an incredible journey. It's very humbling to go knocking on doors and to ask people for their vote. I've visited with almost 4,000 voters at this point, knocking on more than 2,000 doors, walking about 200 miles, making phone calls, holding events, showing up at city council meetings and other public body meetings, just trying to be visible to let people know that I'm here. I care about the same concerns you do because they're my concerns as well. And so I have the time and the energy to be your representative if you'll trust me with that. Because it's an incredible power to ask someone to yield their power in our society and trust you with it. I mean, that's a huge ask. And so I feel as though it's my burden to prove that I can do that respectfully and responsibly. And it's really been an amazing journey to go throughout Seaside and to have that conversation with people.
And you find out what their issues are, their problems are, and you've got to go be the one that, it's not about you, it's about them.
Absolutely.
You're a vehicle for them.
You hit the nail on the head.
And it's a calling, and it's a challenge, and it's got to be fabulously interesting.
It is. I do not kid you when I say it's very rewarding to have a conversation with someone and to understand where they're coming from and to offer them some ideas, and then to have the hope, because hope is so powerful, have the hope that we might be able to actually improve upon that thing. Folks who are asking for sidewalks in the middle of Seaside that haven't had sidewalks ever, and the city is 64 years old. People who are asking for, my adult son lives with me and we don't have space for him. I'd love to convert my garage, but I don't have enough water to do it, but I don't want to violate the rules and then get charged and my house is red tagged. These are people with real problems that just want some help.
And these are people who make our community
absolutely
what it is.
And nurses, firefighters, and police, absolutely, but also the people cleaning your table at the restaurant, the people who drive the school buses, the people who make our society function.
A great community takes care of everybody.
Exactly right.
And makes it a point to take care of
exactly.
everybody.
All boats rise.
And if we aspire to be a great community, a leader for the country, and these issues are important that we solve them here. And you're giving it a shot. So thank you for coming on.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for your time today.
So this is Jon Wizard running for Seaside City Council, and it's just this is all great stuff. You're watching the YourTown television program. I'm Baer. We'll be back for sure. Thank you.